The road out to the eastern industrial quarter was little more than a strip of broken asphalt, strangled by weeds and frost. My headlights swept across rusted fences and collapsed warehouses, their metal bones jutting into the night like skeletons of an era long buried. The city had abandoned this sector decades ago, when industries shifted elsewhere, but one place still drew whispers, the factory that locals called simply the Ash. I had been summoned here by a letter, hand-delivered to my office, unsigned and written in a script that looked half-etched, half-burned into the paper. The factory breathes again. Come before it feeds. No explanation, no return address. Just those words and a faint scent of soot clinging to the envelope. When I pulled up to the gates, I cut the engine and let the silence settle. The factory loomed ahead, a black silhouette against the moonless sky. Tall smokestacks stabbed upward like spears, though they had not spat fire in half a century. Windows gaped open, shards of glass catching faint light like the eyes of predators. The sign above the main entrance had long since corroded, leaving only the outline of letters that once spelled Ravenholt Coal and Steel. I stepped out of the car. The cold bit into me immediately, sharper here than in the city, as though the factory itself leached heat from the air. The crunch of gravel under my boots echoed too loudly, like I was trespassing into something that preferred to be left undisturbed. The gate was chained shut, but one section of fencing had collapsed inward. I slid through carefully, feeling the rough bite of rust against my coat. The moment I entered the yard, I smelled it, ash, dry and acrid, as though the furnaces were still alive beneath the concrete floor. The main doors resisted my push at first, swollen from years of weather, then groaned open with a noise that carried across the yard like a dying animal. I stepped inside. The interior swallowed my flashlight beam, walls of iron and brick stretching up into shadow. Conveyors, rusted and broken, wound like veins through the cavernous hall. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly though no breeze touched them. My footsteps stirred echoes that did not match the rhythm of my stride. I stopped. Listened. There it was, soft, deliberate, out of sync with me. Footsteps. I swung the light across the floor. Nothing but machinery and dust. Yet the echoes persisted, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead, never settling. I called out once. My voice came back cracked and hollow, carrying too far into the bowels of the factory. The deeper I went, the thicker the air became. Ash clung to every surface, coating machinery like a second skin, drifting lazily when disturbed. It wasn't the ash of time, the natural decay of an abandoned place. It was fresh, as though furnaces had burned yesterday. My fingers brushed it and came away black. Then I saw them, prints. Human prints in the ash, leading down one of the conveyor paths. Bare feet, long strides, as if whoever left them walked calmly, unhurried, straight into the dark. I followed. The prints wound past gutted engines and shattered catwalks until they ended abruptly at a furnace door. The massive iron hatch hung open, the interior black and yawning. My light probed inside, revealing only more ash piled high, shifting as though stirred by something beneath. And then came the sound. A low, dragging exhale. Like breath. The factory was not abandoned. The sound pressed against my ears like a weight. Low, guttural, unsteady, as if the factory itself was struggling to draw a breath after years of silence. I froze in front of the furnace, light trembling in my hand, the beam swallowed whole by the black interior. Another exhale. This time longer, wetter, carrying with it a faint hiss like steam escaping from a cracked pipe. My instincts screamed at me to step back, but curiosity rooted me in place. The ash inside shifted, collapsing into itself, and for a moment I swore I saw the imprint of ribs pushing up from beneath, like something enormous lying just under the surface. I snapped the beam away and pressed my back against the wall. My breath clouded in front of me, far too visible, far too heavy for a room that should have been sealed and dead. The echoes of footsteps returned. This time clearer, closer. Not mine. I turned quickly, sweeping the light across the factory floor. Between the rusted skeletons of machines, something moved, a figure, pale against the black. A man, thin to the point of skeletal, skin caked with soot. His eyes reflected the beam like an animal's. "Who's there?" I called. My voice cracked on the second word. The figure did not answer. He only lifted one hand, long-fingered and shaking, and pointed back toward the furnace. Then, without a sound, he stepped backward, melting into the shadows, until there was nothing left of him but the disturbed ash where his feet had been. I swallowed hard. My pulse hammered in my throat. The furnace door yawned wider. Metal hinges groaned without my touch, opening inch by inch. From within came a dull orange glow, faint, like embers buried deep. This factory was not dead. I stepped away, careful not to turn my back to it. My beam fell on the walls, black with years of soot. And there, scratched deep into the brick, symbols. Circles intersecting with lines, crude shapes like eyes, like flames. Repeated over and over, covering entire stretches of wall. Fresh marks, not decades old. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. I pushed deeper into the main hall, moving past conveyor belts collapsed in heaps. Ash rained down from the rafters above, stirred by no wind. My every step left black prints that trailed behind me, stark and too visible, like a trail for whatever lingered in this place. At the far end of the hall, I found the stairwell, iron steps spiraling up toward a gantry that overlooked the furnaces. The metal groaned under my weight, vibrating with a resonance that felt almost alive, like the steps themselves were breathing along with the factory. From above, faint voices reached me. Whispers. Not one but many. Overlapping, frantic yet soft, as though spoken directly into the walls. I strained to hear words but only caught fragments. Burn, stay, not enough, again. The voices rose, then fell in unison, like a chant. At the top, I reached the catwalk. My light swept across the chamber below, catching more furnaces, each with doors gaping, each with ash piled high. Chains swayed though the air was still. Shadows slid along the floor where nothing should have cast them. And then I saw movement below. 3 figures this time, walking in single file along the central aisle. All barefoot. All ash white. They moved with perfect synchronization, heads bowed, arms limp at their sides. Their feet left no sound on the floor, only faint disturbances in the ash. I crouched low, watching. They walked straight toward another furnace. Without hesitation, the first climbed inside. Then the second. Then the third. The doors swung shut behind them with a finality that made my stomach turn. The whispers above me fell silent. And then, screams. Muffled, distorted, echoing from inside the metal. The sound of flesh against fire. I stumbled back, my shoulders slamming into the railing. My flashlight slipped, clattering against the catwalk, its beam rolling wild across the floor. The screams cut off instantly. Silence pressed in heavy as stone. I bent to grab the light, fingers trembling. When I lifted it, the furnace door below had swung open again. Ash spilled onto the floor in a dark cascade, shifting like something alive. No figures remained. Just a shape in the ash, long arms, elongated skull, eyes hollow as pits. It dissolved when I blinked. The whispers returned, louder now, almost angry. I turned to retreat down the stairs, and froze. A figure blocked the stairwell. Closer than before, clearer. The same skeletal man I had seen earlier. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting my light. Ash clung to his skin like it grew from him, every inch of him coated, cracked, blackened. His lips moved, but no sound emerged, only the faint hiss of air escaping charred lungs. Finally, words formed, gravelly and broken. "You shouldn't have come!" Before I could answer, he vanished again, collapsing into a cloud of ash that billowed upward, coating my face and choking my breath. I stumbled back, coughing, wiping grit from my eyes. When I opened them, the catwalk was empty. I forced myself down the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to get back to the car and drive until the city swallowed me again. But the letter, the warning, the factory breathes again. Come before it feeds. If I left, whatever was happening here would spread. And I couldn't shake the thought that the skeletal figures weren't just apparitions, they had been human once. Workers? Victims? Something worse? I pressed onward, deeper into the factory. Past the furnaces, I found a corridor leading underground, iron doors hanging crooked on their hinges. The air grew hotter as I descended, though no fire should have burned here for decades. The walls closed in, stones sweating with moisture, the smell of ash giving way to something sharper, burnt hair, cooked flesh. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a chamber. And there it was. The source. A pit, circular and wide, ringed with broken machinery. Ash poured from it like smoke, thick clouds rolling out and dissipating into the air. The whispers were deafening here, hundreds of voices colliding, desperate, angry, pleading. Shapes moved in the haze, faces pressing out of the ash, screaming silently before collapsing inward again. I staggered closer, unable to stop myself. My light caught on something in the pit. Bones. Hundreds of them. Charred, blackened, fused together. Skulls locked in eternal screams. Limbs twisted into shapes that defied anatomy. The ash crawled across them, filling the sockets, knitting the bones together as though building something. Something massive. And as I watched, it twitched. The ash factory was not just haunted. It was feeding. The pit writhed. For a long, terrible moment, I could not breathe. The ash moved as though stirred by something beneath, a tide shifting against the bones. Faces bloomed and collapsed within it, skulls yawning wider than jaws should allow. The whispers struck like a gale, countless voices pouring into my skull, cutting off thought with their urgency. Burn with us. Feed the fire. One flame, one body, again, again, again. I staggered back, hand clamped over my ears, though it did nothing. The voices weren't in the air, they were inside me. My knees buckled as heat rippled through the chamber, rolling waves that stung my skin. My light flickered, then died, plunging me into a darkness so absolute that even my own outline ceased to exist. Then, deep in the pit, something opened its eyes. Two circles of faint orange, dim as dying coals yet vast. They fixed on me, unblinking. Not human. Not even close. I froze, too terrified to move, too horrified to scream. The eyes blinked once, slow, deliberate, and the ash around them surged upward, forming limbs, fingers, a torso stitched together from dust and bone fragments. The ash was walking. The ground trembled as the thing pulled itself free from the pit. Bones cracked in its grasp like kindling. Its body stretched taller than the ceiling should allow, yet it bent itself unnaturally, folding like smoke, reforming again. I turned to run, but the corridor behind me slammed shut. The iron door I had left ajar screeched as if pulled by a giant's hand, crashing closed so hard sparks flew. The air thickened. I was sealed in. The voices united into one, low, endless, rolling like a furnace roar. Feed. Ash surged across the floor, alive, snaring my boots. I fell hard, coughing as black dust filled my lungs. I clawed at the ground, dragging myself backward, desperate to break free as the tide climbed my legs, my waist. It was like drowning in dry smoke. I fired my revolver, point blank. Bullets tore through the cloud, scattering ash, cracking bone beneath. The thing recoiled, but only for a breath. The fragments reknit, reforming stronger, thicker. Flesh burns faster, it hissed. I ripped free and staggered toward the wall. My light was gone, but faint orange glow from the pit painted the chamber in shifting firelight. I could make out pipes above me, rusted but intact old steam lines. If fire had birthed this thing, maybe water could hinder it. I climbed, scrambling onto a broken console, then leapt for the pipe. My weight pulled it down with a shriek of metal. Steam hissed as the rusted iron split, spraying boiling water into the chamber. The ash shrieked. For the first time, the voices faltered. The creature recoiled as steam clouded the pit, its shape dispersing, limbs unraveling into dust. I dropped back to the ground, skin blistered where the steam had caught me, but alive. The thing drew back into the pit, whispering furiously. Not enough. Not enough. Then silence. The ash fell still. I didn't wait. I stumbled up the corridor, slamming my shoulder into the iron door until the rusted hinges groaned. On the third strike, it burst open, and I spilled onto the factory floor. But I was not alone. Figures lined the aisles. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Ash-white, skin cracked, eyes glowing faintly like the embers I had seen in the pit. Workers in torn uniforms. Women in dresses burned to tatters. Children barefoot, their faces blank with soot. They did not move. They only watched. And then, in unison, they turned their heads toward the furnace hall. Toward the pit. I followed their gaze. Heat shimmered from the open furnace doors. Chains rattled on their own. The whispers rose again, filling every corner of the factory. And then, all at once, the figures collapsed into dust, falling where they stood, unraveling into drifting clouds that rushed toward the furnaces, feeding them. The factory roared alive. Every machine shuddered. Conveyors groaned, gears clanked, pistons moved though rust ate half their teeth. The floor shook beneath me. Ash geysered from cracks in the concrete, filling the air until the ceiling vanished in haze. Something had awoken, and it wanted more. I ran. Past the broken belts, past the chained furnaces, toward the exit where faint moonlight glowed through shattered windows. The air boiled with whispers, too many to understand, though one word returned again and again. Hunger. I crashed through a side door into the loading bay. Cold night air hit me like a blessing. For the first time since I stepped inside, I could see stars above the smokestacks. I collapsed against a rusted truck, sucking in the air as though it might burn away the factory's stench inside me. But the reprieve lasted only seconds. The smokestacks were alive. Ash poured from them in torrents, not drifting upward but falling, cascading like waterfalls of soot. It spread across the ground, thickening into shapes that dragged themselves upright. Workers. Dozens. Hundreds. Their mouths open, whispering in unison. Back inside. They stepped toward me. I fired again, but bullets tore only holes in their bodies, holes that closed with drifting ash. I sprinted toward the chain-link fence, boots slipping in the growing tide. Hands clawed at me, cold as chalk, brittle but countless. They pulled at my jacket, my arms, my throat. I tore free, scraping skin on jagged wire as I climbed the fence. I fell hard on the far side, rolling onto cracked pavement. My revolver skittered away into the dark. When I scrambled to my feet, they were all gone. The loading bay, the fence, the smokestacks, empty. Silent. Not a single figure in sight. Only a thin layer of ash clinging to the ground like frost. Had I imagined it? No. The bruises on my arms, the cuts on my throat, they were real. The taste of soot in my lungs was real. The screams still echoed in my ears. I turned back to the factory. Its windows glowed faint orange. Smoke drifted from the roof. Machines thudded faintly inside. It was awake. And I knew then, beyond doubt, this wasn't over. The ash factory hadn't just survived death. It had been waiting. The ash did not lie still. It moved with the breeze, yes, but not like ordinary soot. Each grain seemed deliberate, flowing in patterns too precise to be chance. Lines drew themselves across the cracked pavement, symbols, circles, letters written in no language I had ever studied, yet instinct told me they were words. The factory was speaking. The whispers never stopped. Even outside, with the night air in my lungs, they hissed through my ears, under my skin, sliding down my throat like smoke. Come back. Come back. Come back. I pressed my palms to my ears until pain bloomed, but it was no use. The sound lived inside. I stumbled away from the fence, boots crunching on frostbitten gravel, but the farther I went, the louder it became. As though the ash was no longer confined to the factory, it was in me. I had to know if it was in the town too. The village of Black Hollow lay less than a mile from the factory. Once it thrived on the wages the furnaces provided. Now it rotted, half its windows boarded, half its streets abandoned. The air there always smelled faintly of smoke, though the factory had been closed for decades. Tonight, the smell was suffocating. I reached the first row of houses. Their shutters rattled in a wind that didn't stir my coat. Every surface was dusted in ash, as if it had snowed. I brushed a layer from a porch railing, still warm. A door opened behind me. I spun, hand on my revolver. An old man leaned against the frame, his eyes white with cataracts, yet they glowed faintly orange in the dark. He smiled without teeth. You woke them. My throat tightened. Who? The ones in the fire. He stepped closer. His skin cracked when he moved, scattering ash that drifted back into his pores like insects crawling home. His voice grew softer, conspiratorial. They never left. You think fire ends a man? No. It keeps him. Bone is coal. Skin is tinder. Spirit is smoke. He leaned closer, the glow in his eyes intensifying until I could see nothing else. And hunger is eternal. I shoved him back. His body burst apart in a cloud of ash. Not bone, not blood, just dust dispersing into the night. Yet even as it fell, it whispered, "Feed the furnaces." I ran. Through streets that bent wrong, houses that shifted when I blinked, doors opening to reveal faces I didn't want to see. Every figure in that town, children, mothers, men, watched from behind cracked glass, eyes glowing faintly orange. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They only stared. The church bell rang. It hadn't tolled in 40 years. But now it shook the air with a single heavy note, low and rusted. Windows cracked. Ash fell in sheets from rooftops. And then, voices. Hundreds of them, layered, rising from the direction of the church. A choir. Not singing. Chanting. One fire, one body. Ash to ash. One fire, one body. Ash to ash. The ground trembled with every verse. I had to see it. The church doors were wide open, lights spilling out like molten glass. Inside, the pews were full. Men and women, rows upon rows, sitting in silence. Their clothes were decades out of time. Their skin was gray, hair brittle, faces blank as clay. but their mouths moved in unison. One fire, one body. Ash to ash. The priest stood at the pulpit, robe torn and blackened, his jaw unhinged wider than nature allowed. Smoke poured from his throat as he bellowed the words. His hands gripped a book charred down to its spine, pages crumbling as he turned them. Behind him, where the crucifix had once hung, stood a furnace door. Not wood, not metal, ash pressed together, glowing faintly from within. The whispers poured from it like steam, and then the congregation rose. Not at once, but like a wave rolling through them, pew after pew. Their heads turned toward me in perfect unison, eyes blazing orange. The chant did not stop. If anything, it grew louder. The priest extended his hand, pointing straight at me. The furnace door cracked open. Heat blasted the hall. Ash spiraled upward, filling the rafters until the stained glass burned white. Figures stepped from the furnace, not men, not women, but shapes carved from smoke and embers, faces half-formed, arms trailing sparks. The congregation fell to their knees as one, bowing, chanting still. One fire, one body. Ash to ash. The furnace shapes drifted toward me, and the ground beneath my boots cracked, glowing faintly as if magma pulsed below. My revolver was useless. I fired anyway. Bullets vanished into smoke. The first shape reached for me. Its hand passed through my coat without tearing fabric, but where it touched, cloth dissolved into ash. My skin beneath blistered, blackened, but no blood flowed, only soot. I screamed and staggered back, clutching at my chest. My shirt crumbled under my fingers. The whisper in my skull roared, "Join us." I bolted. Through the pews, over crumbling hymnals, out the door into night. The chant followed, vibrating in my bones. The whole church seemed to lean forward as if reaching for me, its spire burning from within. I didn't stop until the factory loomed again. The smokestacks belched ash like volcanoes, blotting out the stars. Machines thundered though no power fed them. Windows glowed orange, every pane and eye staring outward. The town wasn't infected by the factory. The town was the factory. Every street, every house, every church, they had been rebuilt of ash and memory, hollow shells animated by hunger. And I was standing in the throat of it, a single breath away from being swallowed. I dropped to my knees, gasping, trying to remember something, anything, that could help. The steam had driven it back. Water. I needed water. But in this place, the river had been poisoned, choked with ash decades ago. Wells dried, pipes corroded. The factory had drunk it all. Except the reservoir. The old black hollow reservoir sat above the town, carved into the hillside. If I could breach its dam, flood the valley. The thought turned my stomach. The town was gone, yes, but the shells of its people remained. To drown it would be to destroy every remnant, to erase it utterly. But then I thought of the furnace door, of the shapes at birth, of the glow that had begun in my chest where the smoke hand touched me. If I did nothing, the hunger would spread. The road to the reservoir wound steeply through the hills, every step dogged by the whispers. Shapes followed in the tree-line, ash bodies moving parallel, not attacking, just watching, herding me upward. At times the road itself shifted, bending back toward town, but I forced myself forward. At the crest, the reservoir shimmered in the moonlight, half frozen. The dam stretched across the valley like a scar, concrete cracked but holding. Beyond it, the town burned orange, the factory's smoke choking the stars. I approached the sluice gate, rusted near to breaking. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. Behind me, voices rose. The congregation. The choir. The whole valley chanting in unison, louder than the machines, louder than the wind. One fire, one body. Ash to ash. I turned the wheel. It groaned, resisted, then gave. Water roared into the channels, then into the valley. The flood came fast. A wall of black water tore through the streets, smashing houses, swallowing ash in waves. The church spire toppled, its furnace door vanishing beneath the surge. The factory itself groaned, metal screaming, walls collapsing inward. The chant broke. Screams replaced it, not human, not animal, but vast and furious. The smokestacks vomited fire before bursting apart, hurling embers into the night. The ash shapes in the trees shrieked, dissolving as the water touched them. The valley drowned. I stood on the dam, soaked by spray, chest burning with every breath. The glow beneath my skin dimmed, then guttered out. My shirt was ruined, my skin scarred, but I was alive. Below, Black Hollow was gone. No lights. No whispers. Only water swallowing the ruins. For now. Because as the flood stilled, ripples moved across its surface. Not wind. Not fish. Hands. Ash-gray hands, pressing up against the water's skin, reaching for air. The hunger was not drowned. Only delayed. The water should have been silent. It wasn't. I stood at the dam until my legs threatened to give, listening to the black expanse below. The flood had erased Black Hollow's streets, church, factory, but it had not erased the sound. Beneath the reservoir's surface, voices stirred. Hundreds of them, layered, distorted by the weight of water, chanting in a slow, muffled rhythm. One fire, one body, ash to ash. My gut clenched. They weren't gone. They were waiting. At dawn, I made my way back down the hillside. Smoke no longer curled from chimneys, but the valley reeked of wet ash. Debris floated in the floodwaters, timbers, rusted tools, doors ripped from hinges. And faces. Gray, bloated, drifting just beneath the surface. Their mouths still moved. I kept walking. The town's cemetery lay on higher ground, untouched by water. Yet the earth there had shifted, as though the flood had stirred something underground. Graves had burst, coffins rotted open, but the bodies weren't inside. A trail of ash led from the cemetery back toward the water. The dead had walked. Near the ruined mill, I found him. A man, mid-30s maybe, mud-caked and trembling. He was hacking at the waterline with a shovel, as though he could carve the flood away. His eyes were wide, his lips blistered from ash burn. When he saw me, he froze. "You're not one of them," he rasped. "No." He staggered forward, clutching my arm. "You have to stop it. The choir doesn't drown. It only waits. The flood is their baptism." I pushed him back gently. "Start from the beginning. Who are you?" He coughed, spitting gray phlegm. "Jonah. I was caretaker of the church before it changed. I stayed because I thought I could keep it clean, holy. But the ash got in the rafters. In me." He clawed at his chest. Beneath his shirt, faint orange light flickered. I fought it. I prayed. But the priest, he opened the furnace. He said it wasn't hell, it was a womb. He said fire was God's breath. I ran. I hid. When you opened the dam, I thought. He broke off, eyes wild. From the water came a ripple. Jonah dropped to his knees, shaking. "They're calling. They won't stop until we answer." The surface bulged, as though something massive pressed from below. Then it broke. A figure rose, not ash now but water, transparent flesh, glowing veins, a head without features. Its body rippled with faces screaming silently inside. The flood had given them new form. Jonah screamed. "The drowned choir!" The water-shape lurched toward shore, each step leaving steaming footprints. The chant thundered in my skull, nearly knocking me down. I fired my revolver. Useless. The bullets passed through, splashing water. Jonah fell on his face, sobbing. "We can't fight it. We can't." "Then we run." I grabbed his collar, dragging him back up the slope. Behind us, more shapes rose from the reservoir. 10. 20. A congregation born of water, their voices shaking the ground. One fire. One body. Ash to ash. We found shelter in the only building still standing, a farmhouse on the ridge. The roof sagged, windows shattered, but it was dry. I barred the door with a beam and collapsed inside. Jonah rocked in the corner, mumbling prayers. His chest glowed brighter with each verse he whispered. I searched the house. It belonged to a family once. Toys scattered in the dust, photographs curling on the walls. Every face in those pictures was scratched out. Upstairs, I found journals. The father had worked at the factory. His last entry read, "The furnaces sing now. They tell us we are not fuel, but flame. They say ash is not the end. Tomorrow the priest will show us the door. I will bring Martha and the children. We will be whole." I shut the book, bow rising in my throat. This town hadn't been cursed. It had chosen. Night fell. The house shook with distant chanting. The drowned choir was climbing the slope, drawn to us. Jonah's prayers grew louder, frantic. His skin blistered, glowing cracks running down his arms. Smoke leaked from his mouth with every word. "Jonah," I hissed. "Stop. They're using you." He looked up at me, tears cutting streaks through the ash on his face. "I can't stop. If I stop, it burns worse. If I speak, it eases. They're inside me." His body arched. Fire burst from his chest, not consuming him but forming a shape above him, an ember figure, reaching for the ceiling. The house ignited instantly. Flames raced through the wood like veins. I grabbed my satchel and ran. Behind me, Jonah's voice merged with the chant, then vanished in an explosion that leveled the farmhouse. On the ridge, I looked down at the reservoir. The drowned choir had multiplied. Dozens now, maybe hundreds, rising from the water, their bodies a fusion of ash and current. They were moving inland, away from the valley, toward other towns, other fires. The flood hadn't saved anyone. It had given the choir legs. The whispers in my skull grew louder. My chest still ached where the smoke hand had touched me in the church. I knew the truth then. The hunger had marked me. I could drown it, burn it, bury it, but it would keep coming back. Unless I ended it here. The factory was gone, but its heart remained, the furnace door I had seen in the church. That was no ordinary fire. It was the source. The womb, as Jonah called it. If I could reach it before the choir spread, maybe, just maybe, I could shut it for good. But I knew the price. The furnace took. Always. To close it, I would have to feed it something greater than ash or water. I would have to feed it myself. The valley was no longer silent. The chant followed me like breath itself, low, droning, impossible to block out. The drowned choir had left the reservoir behind. They climbed the hills in slow, deliberate unison, their bodies shedding rivulets of water that steamed when it touched the ground. From a distance they looked like pilgrims, hundreds of them, converging on a single unseen altar. I knew where they were going. Back to the factory. Back to the furnace. And I would have to follow. The path down the ridge was worse than before. Whole stretches of road had been consumed by the flood, replaced by mud thick as tar. I trudged through it, boots sticking with every step, while the choir's voices grew louder. They weren't chasing me. They didn't need to. I was already walking toward their destination. Black Hollow itself was drowned, its buildings twisted and broken. But the factory, its bones still stood. Its smokestacks rose like rotten teeth through the mist, black against the faint starlight. The flood had swallowed its lower levels, but I knew the heart lay deeper, past the furnaces, in that door I had glimpsed before. Every breath hurt. My chest burned where Jonah's glowing hand had brushed me in the farmhouse. The ash mark inside me pulsed with every verse of the chant. I wasn't just walking into the furnace. I was carrying part of it already. I cut across what had once been the town square. The water had receded slightly here, leaving a film of black mud. In the center, stalls stood half submerged, their wares rotted or burned. But the townsfolk were still here. They stood waist deep in water, their skin gray and brittle. Their eyes were pits of cinders. And yet they traded, passing handfuls of ash, broken trinkets, bones of small animals. Their mouths moved, whispering the same phrase over and over. Ash's coin. Ash's breath. Ash's life. I ducked low, slipping behind a toppled cart. They didn't notice me at first, too lost in their ritual commerce. But when I disturbed the mud, one of them turned. Her face was gone, melted into a mask of soot. Her jaw unhinged, spilling dry ash instead of a scream. The others turned too. I ran. Their whispers followed, not angry but eager. They wanted to trade with me. And I knew what they wanted, the ember burning in my chest. By the time I reached the outskirts of the factory yard, I wasn't alone. The drowned choir had arrived. Their watery bodies glowed faintly, each one carrying faces of the dead, pressed against the surface like hands against glass. They marched slowly, steadily, every step shaking the ground. Steam rose in sheets from their path, turning the night into a fogged furnace. I kept to the shadows, slipping between rusted rail lines and collapsed sheds. My only advantage was their certainty. They knew I was coming, but they also knew I had nowhere else to go. The factory doors loomed ahead, wide open, waiting. The air was worse this time. Ash no longer clung lazily in drifts, it moved. It swirled, curling into shapes of hands, faces, fragments of mouths whispering fragments of prayer. The machinery groaned with phantom weight. Chains rattled though no wind touched them. And at the far end, the furnaces glowed faintly, though no coal had burned in them for decades. Their doors were open, breathing heat and smoke. Between me and them, the townsfolk had gathered. Not just the ash traders now, but all of them, the workers, the families, the priest. Their bodies were burned, drowned, hollowed, but their voices were strong. They faced the furnaces in rows, chanting. One fire. One body. Ash to ash. I slipped along the catwalk overhead. The metal creaked beneath me, but the congregation didn't look up. They weren't here for me. They were here for the door. I saw him at last. Near the central furnace stood a man in scorched robes. His skin was blackened, fissured with glowing cracks, but he still bore himself like a shepherd. His eyes glowed as though two coals had been set in his skull. He lifted his arms and the chant grew louder. The fire is the womb. The flood is the breath. Together they birth the new flesh. The congregation moaned in unison. The priest turned toward the largest furnace. Its door was open wider now, revealing not flame but something deeper, an endless, shifting glow, as though stars themselves had been ground into ash. The sight made my vision swim. It wasn't heat I felt. It was hunger. The furnace door was alive. The chant rose to a fever pitch. The drowned figures pressed into the hall, joining the ash-born congregation. Water and soot fused, faces merging into a single writhing mass. They knelt before the priest, their bodies dissolving into steam and smoke, feeding the glow within the furnace. The pull nearly dragged me off the catwalk. My chest burned, the ember inside me flaring, eager to leap free and join the rest. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, tasting blood, anchoring myself. But I knew I couldn't resist forever. The furnace wanted me. I climbed down from the catwalk, landing in a heap of ash. The congregation didn't notice, too lost in their worship. Step by step, I crept closer to the furnace door. The heat grew unbearable, though sweat never came, only more ash, rising from my skin. The priest's voice thundered. "The body is kindling. The soul is spark. Together, we ignite eternity." He turned, and his eyes locked on mine. The chant faltered. Hundreds of heads twisted in my direction. "You came," the priest rasped, smiling with teeth of ember. "The final ember. The chosen ash." The congregation surged toward me. I drew my revolver. It felt laughable against this tide, but the sound of gunfire cut through their chant, breaking their rhythm. I fired again and again, not to kill. Nothing here could be killed, but to scatter, to delay. Bodies of ash burst apart, only to reform. Water shapes collapsed into puddles, only to rise again. I ran, shoving through them, heading straight for the furnace. Hands clawed at me. Ash filled my mouth, my eyes. My lungs burned. But I didn't stop. I reached the priest. He spread his arms, welcoming me. "Step through, detective. Become whole." I drove the barrel of my revolver into his chest and pulled the trigger. The priest staggered, glowing cracks racing across his body. He laughed even as he collapsed, his ashes sucked into the furnace's glow. And the door opened wider. The pull became a gale. Everything in the hall was being dragged forward. Ash, water, faces, voices, all spiraling into the furnace. The congregation screamed in ecstasy as they were consumed. I clung to a support beam, my body tearing at the seams. The ember in my chest beat like a second heart, screaming to be released. I understood then. Jonah had been right. The furnace wasn't hell. It wasn't even death. It was hunger made flesh. And it would never close on its own, unless something stronger than hunger filled it. My choices were gone. I staggered to my feet, every step a war, and faced the door. The glow reached for me like a lover's hand. I could end it. But it would mean stepping through. I raised my revolver one last time, not at the furnace, not at the congregation, but at my own chest. The ember pulsed violently, as though it knew. "Not yours," I whispered. "Never yours." I fired. Pain exploded, white hot. The ember tore free, ripped from me in a storm of fire and ash. It screamed, a sound louder than the entire choir, as it was sucked into the furnace. The glow convulsed. The pull became a roar. The congregation shrieked as they were dragged wholesale into the door, their bodies unraveling, voices merging into one final, deafening hymn. The furnace slammed shut. Silence. When I woke, I was lying in the factory yard. The smokestacks were gone, collapsed into rubble. The furnaces had caved in, nothing left but cooling stone. The air was clear. No ash, no steam, no chant. My chest was scarred, a blackened crater where the ember had once burned. But I was alive. The valley was empty. No townsfolk, no choir. Just me. And in the silence, I wondered, had I ended it? Or had I only traded places with the hunger? The night after the factory collapsed was longer than any I had ever known. I walked through the ruins until the sky began to pale, searching for bodies, signs of survivors, any hint that Black Hollow still had life in it. There was nothing. Not a single voice, not a single shadow. The town was gone, drowned, burned, then swallowed whole by something far older than fire. And yet, the world outside had not noticed. When I finally reached the main road, there were no floodwaters, no chanting hordes, no trace of the ash that had smothered every breath within the valley. The asphalt was dry. The fences were broken only by time. It was as though the nightmare had never spilled beyond the factory gates. I touched my chest. The wound where the ember had torn itself free was bandaged crudely, but I knew it had not healed. Not truly. The skin around it was blackened, not with scabs but with something deeper, like soot baked into flesh. Every heartbeat carried with it a faint sting, as if reminding me I was still tethered to what I had left behind. By the time I reached the nearest settlement, the sun had risen. The townsfolk there looked at me with suspicion, then with fear. My coat was scorched, my boots caked with black mud, my face streaked with soot. They asked where I had come from. When I told them Black Hollow, their faces fell blank. "There is no Black Hollow," one old woman muttered. "That place was leveled decades ago. Flood took the whole valley. Nothing left." I didn't argue. I simply ordered a pot of coffee and sat in silence, the taste of ash still in my throat. But silence didn't last. That night, in the rented room above the tavern, I dreamed. The factory was gone, but the furnace door still hovered in the dark. Not stone, not iron, just a wound in the world, pulsing faintly, waiting. And from within came whispers. Not the chant of the drowned. Not the sermons of the priest. It was my own voice, calling me back. I woke drenched in sweat. The mirror across from the bed was fogged, though the air was cold. When I wiped it clear, the reflection that looked back was my own, but its mouth moved even as mine did not. "The fire is the womb," it mouthed. "The fire remembers." I smashed the mirror with my fist. The shards scattered across the floor, each one still bearing my face, each one still mouthing the words. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pull again. Not the roar of hunger, not the gale of 1,000 voices, but a softer thing, a thread pulling gently at my ribs, tugging me back toward the valley. The furnace had not closed. Not completely. And the ember I had cast away had not died. It lived inside me still, smoldering faintly, waiting for the right moment to flare. The longer I stayed in that roadside town, the worse it became. At first it was only me who felt the pull, like a hook lodged behind my sternum, tugging me back toward Black Hollow. But by the second night, others began to notice. The tavern girl who brought me my supper paused too long at the doorway, her gaze fixed on the bandage across my chest. She whispered something under her breath that I couldn't catch, then hurried away. The innkeeper refused my coin, telling me curtly that my room was no longer available. By morning I saw why. Ash. It had begun to gather in the corners of the inn's hallway, fine gray dust that thickened no matter how often it was swept. When I stepped outside, I saw it drifting from me in faint trails, as though my body itself exhaled it. Children pointed. Their mothers pulled them inside. By midday, I was alone on the street. Every window was shuttered. Every door barred. The entire settlement had turned against me, not from hatred, but from fear. That night I dreamt again of the furnace door, but it was different. Wider. The stone threshold had cracked. Heat pulsed faintly from within, a rhythm that matched my own heart. And from behind it came not voices, but a sound closer to breath, slow, patient, inhaling and exhaling in time with mine. I woke with the taste of smoke on my tongue. The air in my room was hazed. On the nightstand lay a shape of ash that hadn't been there before, a circle, drawn perfectly, like the outline of the furnace mouth. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. I left before dawn, following the road north, hoping distance would dim the pull. But with every step, the ember inside me grew hotter. The further I fled, the more the world began to reflect the factory's corruption. Trees sagged as though half-burnt. Stones wept soot. Even the birds that wheeled overhead left trails of gray drifting behind their wings. By the third day, I could not deny it, the furnace had chosen me as its vessel. But a vessel can break. I found an abandoned church along the roadside, its windows shattered, its altar cracked. Inside, the air was thick with mold and dust. I set my lantern down and stripped away the bandages. The wound still glowed faintly, embers pulsing in the flesh, each beat of my heart stoking it brighter. I pressed my knife against it, meaning to cut it out. But the moment steel kissed skin, a voice thundered through the rafters. Pierce. Not whispered. Not many. One. Singular. Direct. The knife slipped from my hand. The lantern flared and died. I was left in the dark, save for the glow from my chest. You sealed the furnace once, the voice said, echoing from the broken altar, from the shattered glass, from inside my own skull. But a seal is not a grave. It waits. It remembers. And you carry its memory now. I forced myself to stand. I won't serve it. The voice laughed, or something close to laughter, dry and hollow. You already do. Each breath you take feeds it. Each step you walk spreads it. The world burns slower through you, but it burns still. I staggered back against the pews. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. Then I'll burn with it, I said. Better to end myself than carry it further. For a moment, silence. Then, a noble vow. But the hollow has heard those words before. Every vessel swears the same. And still the furnace endures. The glow beneath my skin brightened, casting the whole church in a faint red. The wooden beams creaked as if beneath a sudden heat. Outside, I heard the crackle of branches catching fire, though no flame was visible. I knew then what the voice meant. It didn't need my submission. It only needed my existence. The ember would consume me in time, and through me, everything I touched. I left the church at dawn, the doorway crumbling behind me as though rotted by centuries in a single night. The road stretched on, endless, leading nowhere safe. But I walked it still, clutching the one truth that gave me strength. If I was the vessel, then I was also the key. And a key can lock as well as open. The road carried me deeper into wilderness. Forests bent under their own weight, trees sagging like old men, their bark split and blackened as if a fire had passed long ago. Yet when I pressed my hand to the wood, it was cold, damp with dew. Not fire, then, something slower. Something patient. By the fifth night I stumbled across a camp. 3 travelers had pitched tents along the riverbank, their horses tied to a dead willow. They saw me before I saw them, and one raised a rifle in warning. I lifted my hands, showing I meant no harm. Name yourself, the eldest demanded. His beard was streaked with gray, his voice hoarse from tobacco. Pierce, I said. The name seemed to soften them. He lowered the rifle, though his eyes never left the bandage across my chest. Come by the fire, then. The nights here don't forgive. I sat among them. They gave me bread, bitter wine. For a time, silence held. Then the youngest of the group, a woman with a scar across her cheek, pointed to the ashes around the fire pit. Strange, she murmured. Wind still, but the ash moves. She was right. The gray dust stirred faintly, not outward but inward, pulling toward me like filings to a magnet. I shifted, trying to disguise it, but the others had seen. The bearded man spat into the fire. You bring something with you, stranger. Something foul. It's not mine, I said quickly. It's following me. Doesn't matter, the scarred woman replied. It clings to you all the same. Her words cut deep, because they were true. I felt the ember in my chest stir at their suspicion, like a predator sniffing blood. I clenched my fists, forcing my heartbeat to steady, willing the glow to fade. But the third traveler, a boy hardly 20, leaned too close. His eyes widened as if drawn by something behind my ribs. It's shining, he whispered. Inside him. Do you see it? The bearded man cursed, snatching the boy back. We see it. And we want none of it. They turned their backs on me after that. I rose without argument. Whatever safety their fire offered was not worth the risk of what my presence might summon. I left them there, though not without guilt. Because as I walked into the trees, I heard the boy cough, a dry, rattling sound. Then another. Then silence. By dawn, the river carried ash. I pressed on. Sleep became fleeting, plagued by visions of the furnace door widening, heat spilling in pulses that matched the beat of my own heart. Each night, more of the dream bled into waking, cracks in the ground that glowed faintly red, birds dropping from the sky with smoke rising from their feathers, whispers curling from my breath like steam in winter. On the seventh night, I reached the ruins of an old mining town. The buildings leaned like teeth rotted from the gums of the earth, their windows dark, their roofs sagging. Yet there were people still, faces gaunt, eyes hollow, but alive. They watched from doorways as I entered, their silence heavier than accusation. A man stepped forward, his robes tattered but ceremonial. A priest, or what was left of one. He lifted a hand toward me, palm blackened with soot. You've come at last, he said. His voice was cracked, brittle, but certain. I froze. You know me? Not your face. Your fire. His eyes gleamed, fever bright. We felt it stir. We've waited for the vessel to walk. The townsfolk pressed closer, not with fear, but with reverence. Some knelt. Some wept. Their hands reached for me, not to strike, but to touch, to feel the ember that pulsed within me. Revulsion churned in my gut. I stepped back. You don't understand. This thing, if you draw near it, you'll burn. The priest smiled, lips cracked and bleeding. To burn is to be remembered. Their worship was worse than their fear. Fear kept distance. Worship invited collapse. As their voices rose in ragged prayer, I felt the ember flare, responding to their devotion like dry tinder to flame. My chest burned, light spilling faintly through the bandage. The townsfolk gasped as though it were a miracle. No, I growled, forcing my hand over the wound. This isn't salvation. It's hunger. But they didn't hear. Or didn't care. The priest stepped closer, kneeling at my feet. Then feed us. The ember roared. Heat surged through my veins, unbidden. My breath spilled smoke. The wooden beams of the nearest house blackened, curling as though licked by invisible fire. Children laughed in awe, reaching toward the sparks that weren't there. And for a heartbeat, a single, treacherous heartbeat, I understood. To them, I was not a curse. I was proof. A vessel, yes, but one that carried a promise. If I let it, the furnace would rise again. And through me, they would feed it gladly. I tore myself away. Through the crowd, through their reaching hands, through their cries of prayer. I ran until the town was nothing but a smear of shadow behind me. Yet their voices lingered in my skull. Not the chant of the drowned this time. Not the whisper of the dead. But living voices, human voices, crying out for the fire to claim them. And the ember within me pulsed in answer. The forest thinned as dawn broke, its branches trembling under the weight of frost. Light spilled in, pale and hesitant, Yet even that weak sun did not chase away the shadows clinging to my chest. Every step I took felt weighted by the ember inside, a pulse that refused to quiet. I found myself at the edge of a cliff overlooking the remnants of the ash factory. Smoke still curled from chimneys, though no fire burned. The landscape below was blackened, lifeless, yet the air carried a hum, subtle but insistent, vibrating through bone and nerve alike. I realized then that the factory had not truly been abandoned, it had waited. And now so had I. Hours passed. My body moved on autopilot, guided by the ember and instinct alike. It was leading me somewhere, though where was uncertain. I skirted crumbling buildings, each scarred by soot and time, and in their shadows, I glimpsed movement. Figures appeared at the edge of my vision, always human-shaped but never fully corporeal. I blinked, and they were gone, or perhaps only unseen, hiding in some fold of reality. Eventually, the path narrowed to a bridge spanning a frozen river. Ice thick enough to hold weight, yet cracking in places with hollow groans. Across the river stood the remnants of a chapel, blackened stones forming jagged arches like broken teeth. Its doors were ajar, beckoning, whispering. Inside, the air was warmer, unnaturally so, carrying the scent of burning incense mixed with ash. Candles flickered despite the absence of flame, their wax melting upward as if gravity had inverted. At the altar, a figure knelt, hooded and still. I spoke. "I've come to end this." The figure did not move. But then a hand rose, skeletal yet supple, holding a book bound in black leather. Symbols etched in the cover shifted, curling into language I could not comprehend. I felt the ember stir violently, responding to it. "Pierce," the voice said, not from lips but from the air itself, resonating in the marrow of my bones. "You cannot end what has begun. You can only carry it further." I took a step forward, wary. "Then tell me what it wants. Tell me why it feeds." The figure laughed, a sound like wood splintering in slow motion. The ember pulsed, flaring hot, and the shadows in the corners of the chapel writhed. "It wants remembrance. It wants belief. It wants you to bring the living to it willingly. Fear is no longer enough." And then the whispering began. From every corner, the factory, the forest, the cliffside below, voices called, names, cries, prayers, commands. The ember pulsed with them, thrumming against my ribs, calling me to act, to lead, to feed. I staggered back. "No. I am not a god. I am not its servant." The hooded figure tilted its head. "You are both. And soon, all who see you will know it too." The chapel began to shift, walls bending outward, ceiling stretching like skin over bone. Figures appeared, emerging from the stone itself, people from the town, travelers from the forest, miners from the ruins, all drawn here, all worshipping, all believing. Their eyes glimmered with ash and hunger. I realized then that it had already begun. The ember was no longer mine alone. It had spread, touching the hearts of the living, drawing them to me, shaping them into a choir of devotion. And if I faltered, if I gave even a whisper of command, the ash factory would rise again, not as ruin, but as a city of flame, powered by belief and the hunger I carried. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself. "Then I will not lead you," I said, voice trembling but firm. "I will bind you. I will carry this alone." The hooded figure's laugh split the air. "Alone, always alone. Yet never free. Step forward, Pierce. The hollow waits, and you have already fed it." And as I stepped into the center of the chapel, feeling the pulse of the ember in perfect sync with the chanting crowd, I understood the final truth. The world had already changed, and I was no longer a detective. I was a vessel, a beacon, a warning. Outside, the first sparks leapt from the frozen river, tiny fires dancing along the ice. The forest shivered. The ash factory awaited. And somewhere in the distance, unseen, something watched, patient and hungry, waiting for me to falter. I stepped cautiously through the chapel, every footfall echoing against stone that seems alive, pulsating beneath me. The ember in my chest thrums like a living heart, responding to the whispers that swirl around the ruined walls, a chorus of the damned, the lost, and the willing. Outside, the forest bends as if in anticipation, and the remnants of the ash factory groan beneath the weight of some unseen, malevolent hunger. The hooded figure remains before the altar, holding the black-bound book. Its presence radiates authority, as though the very air concedes to its will. The chanting of the gathered figures grows louder, a tide that pulls at the edges of my consciousness. Names, faces, pleas, they are all here, drawn to the ember I carry. The weight of responsibility presses against my chest, and I realize that the final confrontation is not merely physical. It is a struggle of belief, of fear, and of control. I reach into my coat and grip the remnants of the black stone, fragments scattered and fused with ash. Though it had crumbled before, the ember resonates with it now, and I feel the pulse, the heartbeat of the hollow itself, synchronizing with mine. A choice manifests before me. I can attempt to contain it here, risk binding the hunger once more and shouldering the burden alone, or release it entirely, letting the world outside the chapel fall into the grasp of a consuming flame. The hooded figure tilts its head, as if reading the decision in my mind. Pierce, it intones, the voice no longer in words but in vibrations that twist through bone and marrow. Every vessel must choose. Every ember must burn. You have already fed it. Now you decide if it burns in shadow or light. I glance at the crowd, the twisted choir of the lost. Their eyes gleam with ash and devotion, waiting for me to speak. Some are innocents, drawn by accident or curiosity. Others are already marked, their hearts already entwined with the hollow's hunger. I feel their anticipation as a tangible weight, almost suffocating. My hands shake, sweat glistening on my brow, but I force myself to calm, focusing on the ember. Its warmth is comforting and terrible all at once. I murmur an incantation, one I did not consciously know, but which flows from memory buried deep beneath experience and instinct. The black stone hums, and the air thickens, swirling with ash and shadow. Figures cry out, not in pain, but in confusion, as if they recognize a change in the very rules of this space. The hooded figure's voice becomes frantic, tremulous, as if sensing that my resolve has begun to wrest control from its authority. No! You are not ready! You cannot! I step forward, pressing the stone to the ground. Light flares outward, but not the familiar warmth of fire. It is pale, cold, yet contains a force that pushes against the whispers. The chapel quakes, the assembled figures screaming in frustration or awe, or perhaps both. The ember within me pulses violently, threatening to overwhelm, to consume. But I steady it with a single thought: containment, not surrender. Shards of black stone rise into the air, orbiting the altar like satellites, forming a barrier that separates the choir from the central chamber. The hooded figure screams, twisting in the air as shadows peel away from its form, revealing something more horrific beneath: a mass of mouths, eyes, and appendages that should not coexist in a single body. Its voice splits into hundreds of tones, all demanding submission. But I do not yield. I focus on the ember, willing it to burn outward, not inward, willing it to create a boundary the hollow cannot cross. The shadows screech and writhe, attempting to breach the containment, but the stone fragments hum and align, binding the hunger into a prism of cold energy. Time dilates. The chamber stretches impossibly. Figures are frozen mid-motion, hovering between life and unlife. I feel the hollow pulling at my consciousness, testing my will, whispering temptations, freedom, power, omniscience. I grit my teeth. No, I growl. I am the vessel, but I will not be the servant. The black stone pulses one final time, and then silence. Absolute total. The chapel is empty, save for the cold light from the embers now contained within the fractured stone prism. The choir, the hooded figure, the whispers, all are gone, held within a prison of my making. I collapse to my knees, the weight of exhaustion, fear, and relief pressing down. The forest outside is still, the frozen river unbroken. The ash factory stands silent, ruins devoid of hunger, for now. My chest aches, but the ember is steady, dim but alive. I know this is temporary. I know that one day the hollow will stir again, testing the boundaries of my will, seeking to escape. But for now, I have delayed the inevitable. And in that delay lies hope. I stand brushing ash from my coat, and step into the chill morning air. The wind bites, sharp and clean. I can hear nothing but my own heartbeat, and I savor it, the ordinary, fragile rhythm of life. Somewhere, far below, the ember pulses faintly, a reminder that vigilance is eternal, and that even when darkness sleeps, the hollow never truly dies. I turn my back on the ash factory, knowing that as Detective Pierce, my path is not one of peace, but of enduring the weight of what lurks beyond sight, guiding the living against the hunger that will never rest. And as the sun rises over the frozen landscape, painting the world in gold and shadow, I step forward, ready for the next call, the next whisper, the next case that will test not just my mind, but the very essence of who I am.